Hare Krishna everyone, welcome to the Sunday feast. So the next part of the program is the talk by His Grace Drutakarma Prabhu. He's a very senior Vaishnava in the International Society of Krishna Consciousness. So thank you Drutakarma Prabhu for hosting us and we welcome you. Hare Krishna.
So Hare Krishna, good evening everyone. I'm grateful for this opportunity to give a talk at Hare Krishna Temple in Boston. There are many aspects of Krishna consciousness that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada wanted introduced into the Western world. He wanted the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra introduced. He wanted the distribution of spiritual vegetarian prasadam introduced. He wanted the worship of deities of Radha and Krishna introduced. So all of these things are being done. And he also wanted some scientific ideas from the Vedic literature to be introduced. So I'm trying to satisfy that desire of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And I've particularly concentrated on ideas related to human origins and antiquity. So I've written some books about these topics. One of my most recent books is called The Forbidden Archaeologist, which I'm going to talk about tonight. Some copies of that book will be available later on. Where are those books now? Oh, okay. We'll put them on display after this talk. Okay. All right. So there's a few copies, not very many, but if anybody wants one, they could have a look. So this book, The Forbidden Archaeologist, is made of columns that I write for a magazine called Atlantis Rising. So the book is a collection of 50 of these columns, and they're all short, very easy to read. They're a good introduction to my work. And the reason, I call the book The Forbidden Archaeologist is because I deal with things that many mainstream archaeologists today aren't aware of or don't like to consider. Now, to understand why I became involved in this topic, you have to understand something about my life. And my life can be divided into two parts. The first part went from 1948, the year I was born, until 1973. Something significant happened in my life at that point. But during many of these first years of my life, I was a student. And my gurus or teachers were people like Charles Darwin and his modern followers. And from them, I learned that the first human beings like us appeared on Earth about 150,000 years ago. And I learned that before that, there were no human beings like us on Earth. There were only more primitive ape-like human ancestors. But the second part of my life goes from 1973 until the present. In 1973, I came in contact with the teachings of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And in 1976, he accepted me as his disciple. And from this new guru, I learned different things than I learned from my previous gurus or teachers. Srila Prabhupada did not accept this Darwinian theory of human evolution. And it wasn't just his personal opinion. He was basing his opinion on the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, the Vedic literature. He wrote in his purport to one of these Vedic literatures, the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavat Purana, as it's sometimes called. Theory of the anthropologist, it is said that 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had not appeared on this planet because the process of evolution had not reached that point. Now, when he wrote this in the 1970s, that's what they were saying. You know, most of the anthropologists were thinking humans like us first appeared about 40,000 years ago. Now they've extended it a little further into the past to about 150,000 years. But Srila Prabhupada goes on to say, however, the Vedic histories, the Puranas and Mahabharata, relate human histories that extend millions and millions of years into the past. So it's quite a different idea, you know, that we find in the Vedic literature. These ideas are expressed in Vedic literature such as the Bhagavat Purana or the Srimad Bhagavatam. And to really understand these very ancient human histories, we first have to understand something about the Vedic conception of time. The Vedic conception of time is cyclical. There are vast cycles of creation and destruction that go on endlessly. And the basic unit of this Vedic cyclical time is the kalpa, or the day of Brahma. It lasts for 4,320,000,000 years. It's followed by a night of Brahma, which also lasts 4,320,000,000 years. Then there's another day of Brahma, another night of Brahma. The cycle goes on and on and on. And during the days of Brahma, life, including human life, is manifest in the universe. And during the night of Brahma, life, including human life, is not manifest. So the kalpa, or the day of Brahma, is divided into 14 subcycles called manvantars, or manvantar periods. Each one lasts about 300 million years. The Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavat Purana, says something interesting in one of its texts from the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. The most interesting part is here. It says, Deva Sura Nranam Sargo Naganam Mrigapakshinam Vamanu. So this text from the Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavat Purana, is saying that human beings were existing during the Swayambhuva Manvantar period. So when was that? Today, according to the Vedic cosmological calendar, we are in the 7th Manvantar of the current Kalpa, the Vaivasvata Manvantar. The Swayambhuva Manvantar is the first one in the Kalpa. That's about 1.7 to 2.0 billion years ago. So it's a long time ago. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, or Bhagavat Purana, is saying human beings were present during that time. And it gives examples of the humans that were present during that time. One of them was the boy saint Dhruva Maharaj. Many of you know the story. He was a 5-year-old boy. He went into the forest to find God. He met the sage Narada Muni, and Narada Muni asked him, "What are you doing in the forest? You're just a little boy. You should be home with your mother. It's very dangerous here in the forest. You should go home." And Dhruva said, "I'm not going home. I'm going to find God." So Narada Muni, seeing that he was very determined, gave him a mantra to chant and told him to go to a specific place and chant that mantra. And if he did that, he would see God. So Dhruva did that. He went to the place indicated by Narada Muni. He chanted that mantra, and eventually God appeared to him in the form of Vishnu or Narayan, in the four-armed form. So that took place, according to the Bhagavat Purana, during the Swayambhuva Manvantar. And where did it take place? It took place in the Madhuvan forest, which is near the town of Mathura in northern India. There on the map, you can see the location of the Madhuvan forest. It's a little south of Mathura. I went to that forest. It's, from the spiritual point of view, it's a very nice place to visit. It's one of the 12 forests of Vrindavan where Lord Krishna appeared and displayed his pastimes thousands of years ago. So from the spiritual point of view, as a devotee of Krishna, it's a nice place to visit. But I was also interested in the historical aspect of the place. In the Madhuvan forest, there's a hill called the Dhruva Tila, or Dhruva Hill. And on that hill, there is a temple. Oops, wrong button. On that hill, there's a temple. And in that temple, there are 3 deities. Just like on the altar here, there are different deities. In this temple, there are deities of Narada Muni, of Lord Vishnu, and of Dhruva Maharaj, the boy saint. So this temple is commemorating events that took place millions and millions and millions of years ago at this location. And if you go to India, you'll find thousands of temples, thousands of sacred places all over the whole country that are commemorating events that took place millions of years ago. You know, for example, in South India, we find the Sri Rangam temple. It's one of the most famous temples in India. It's a very large Vishnu or Krishna temple. It's located in the Tamil Nadu state in South India. I visited there a few years ago. It's a very worthwhile place to visit from the spiritual point of view. It's a sacred place. But I was also interested in the historical aspect of the place. And the history of this place is told in Sanskrit works like the Sri Rangam Mahatmyam, which is included in some Puranas or historical writings. The main deity worshipped at this temple is called Ranganatha. It's a reclining form of Vishnu, Vishnu lying on a serpent bed in the causal ocean. According to the temple histories, this deity has a very interesting story. Originally, it was worshipped by the chief demigod, Lord Brahma, on Brahmaloka, a higher, subtle material planet. Then it was worshipped by the sun god, Vivasvan, and Vivasvan passed it on to his son, Vaivasvata Manu, who is the Manu of the current Manvantar, the one we're in now. And Manu gave it to his son, Ikshvaku, who was a king ruling in Ayodhya, the town of Ayodhya in northern India. He was the first king in the Surya Vamsha, or solar dynasty of kings in ancient India. So, when was he living? He was living at the beginning of the 7th or Vaivasvata Manvantar period. That's about 120 million years ago. So at that time, he began worshiping this deity in Ayodhya, and then the next king in the solar dynasty, the Surya Vamsha, worshipped the deity, and then the next king for millions of years until the time of Lord Ramachandra. And many of you know the history of Lord Ram. He killed the demon Ravan in Lanka. In the battle with Ravan, Ram was helped by Ravan's own brother, Vibhishana. And after the battle, Ram took Vibhishana back to Ayodhya, and out of gratitude gave him the Ranganatha deity. So Vibhishana was going to take the Ranganatha deity from Ayodhya to his kingdom in Lanka, which is further south. But he stopped on an island in the Kaveri River, the present location of the Sri Rangam temple. And there was an agreement that he had made that if he stopped anywhere, the deity would remain at that place and not move. So the deity stayed at that place and would not move any further. So a local king built a temple, and successive temples have been built in that location since that time for this deity. So when did this take place? According to the Ramayana, the history of Lord Ram, he existed during a Treta Yuga. There's a cycle of 4 yugas called the Divya Yuga that repeats again and again and again. So each Manvantar period is made up of 71 such Divya Yugas. We are now in the very beginning of the Kali Yuga, of the 28th Divya Yuga, of the 7th Manvantar, of the current Kalpa, or day of Brahma, if you want to know what day it is according to the Vedic cosmological calendar. So the cycle of 4 yugas goes from Satya to Treta to Dwapara to Kali. So we're now in the beginning of the Kali Yuga, and to get back to the very end of the Treta Yuga, you have to go back about 870,000 years. And most authorities believe Ram was existing towards the beginning of Treta Yuga, which would be, over 1.5 million years ago. So it's a long time ago, if it's the most recent Treta Yuga. But some authorities say, like Rupa Goswami, in his book Laghu Bhagavatamrita, that Ram appeared in the Treta Yuga of the 24th Divya Yuga of the current Manvantar. So that would be not there, but 4 Yuga cycles, 4 Divya Yugas before. That would be about 18 to 20 million years ago. So what can we gather from this account? We can understand that according to the temple histories, the Ranganatha deity has been worshipped on earth for about 120 million years, and there have been temples at Sri Rangam for 20 million to 18 million years. And you can find places like this all over India. Temples commemorating events that took place in different yugas, in different Manvantar periods, going back many millions of years. And the accounts are given in the Puranas, in the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, and many other Vedic histories. So, what are we to make of these accounts? Some people will take them as mythological, because according to their understanding, there were no human populations on Earth millions of years ago, as these ancient histories describe. Now, for me, as a devotee of Krishna, as a Vaishnava, as a follower of the Vedic path, I accept the statements of the Vedic literature as evidence. They are self-evident truths, as far as I'm concerned. People in the world today do not accept statements from the Vedic literature as evidence. They want to know, is there any archaeological evidence that humans have existed on Earth for millions and millions of years? And actually, there is some archaeological evidence reported in the scientific literature that's consistent with what the Vedic histories tell us. And I documented that evidence in this book, Forbidden Archaeology, which is about 900 pages long. I wrote it along with another member of the Hare Krishna movement, Dr. Richard Thompson. Sadhaputta Prabhu was his initiated name. And but the evidence that we documented in this book from the scientific literature is not very well known because of what we call a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. We can call the blue box there the knowledge filter. It represents the dominant theory about human origins today in the world of science. And reports of evidence that conform to that dominant theory will pass through this intellectual filter very easily, which means students will read about this evidence in their textbooks. But if there's evidence that radically contradicts the dominant theory, it tends to be filtered out, which means we don't hear very much about it, even though it actually is there in the scientific literature. And I'll give a few examples. In the 19th century, the Italian geologist Giuseppe Ragazzoni found human skeletons in layers of rock 4 million years old at a place called Castanedolo in northern Italy. I went to that village of Castanedolo and I met this Italian man there, and he gave me a copy of a very rare geological report about these discoveries. From the information in the report, we were able to locate the place where the original discoveries were made. Now, when some scientists today, excuse me, when some scientists today hear that a human skeleton has been found in layers of rock 4 million years old, they find it hard to believe. And they suggest here's what's probably happened. Maybe 4,000 years ago, somebody died on the surface there, and then his friends dug a grave, and they put the body down into that ancient layer of rock, and that's why you think you've found a human skeleton millions of years old. Now, things like this can happen. It's certainly possible. But the discoverer, Dr. Ragazzoni, was a professional geologist, and he was very much aware of this problem. And he said, okay, if it had been a burial, then the layers of rock above the skeleton would have been disturbed, as we see here. But he said he looked very carefully when he was taking the skeleton out of the ground, and he could see that all the layers of rock above the skeleton were intact, undisturbed, meaning that the skeleton really did belong in the layer of rock in which it was found, in this case, about 4 million years old. This is the Portuguese geologist, Carlos Ribeiro. He discovered hundreds of human artifacts in his country of Portugal in layers of rock 20 million years old. He displayed the artifacts in those glass cases in the Museum of Geology in Lisbon, with labels indicating an age of 20 million years. If you go to the museum today, you won't see them on display there anymore. Today they're kept locked in the cabinets behind me. But I got permission from the director of the museum to open up those cabinets, and I was able to study and photograph some of these 20 million year old human artifacts from Portugal. I also studied Dr. Ribeiro's original maps and notes in the museum archives. And then I went into the countryside of Portugal, and I relocated some of the places where he made his discoveries, such as the mine at Morganheira, where he found human artifacts like this one in layers of rock 20 million years old. It's interesting what happened. When Ribeiro was alive, he displayed the artifacts in the museum with labels showing an age of 20 million years. After he died, his colleagues in the museum did something interesting. They left the artifacts on display, but they wrote new labels for all of them, giving them far younger ages. This is the new label they wrote for the artifact I just showed you. The second line gives the age. It says in Portuguese, Paleolítico Superior. That means Upper Paleolithic period. According to archaeologists, that period goes back about 20,000 years. So Ribeiro's colleagues thought 20 million years, that's impossible. 20,000 years, that sounds about right. So they wrote new labels for all of the artifacts. And then the next generation of officials in the museum just put the entire collection away, and I'm the first researcher to see them in over 50 years. A case I've always found fascinating is the California gold mine discoveries. Gold was discovered in California in the 19th century. To get the gold, miners dug tunnels into the sides of mountains like Table Mountain in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And deep inside these tunnels in the solid rock, the miners found human bones and human artifacts. For example, they found many of these stone mortars and pestles. And we may wonder what the ancient people were doing with these things. Maybe they were making some garam masala for the Sunday feast. So, what makes these things so interesting to me is they were found in layers of solid rock that belonged to the early part of the geological period called the Eocene, which means they'd be about 50 million years old. Now, from the standpoint of a Vedic archaeologist, that's not impossible. But from the standpoint of modern archaeologists, it's just beyond imagination. Now, these discoveries were originally reported to the scientific world by Dr. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. He was actually educated here in Boston at Harvard University. His report about these discoveries was published by Harvard University. But we don't hear very much about these discoveries today because of the process of knowledge filtration. This is the anthropologist William Holmes, who worked at the Smithsonian Institution. He wrote, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, he wouldn't have published that report. In other words, if the facts did not support the theory of evolution, they should be forgotten. And basically, that's what happened. Now, some years ago, I was a consultant for a television documentary called The Mysterious Origins of Man that was shown on NBC. The producer of this documentary had read my book, Forbidden Archaeology, and he wanted to include some cases from the book in the documentary. So I told him he should go to the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley, because I knew that some of the artifacts from the California gold mines are still in the collection of that museum. So he went there, but the museum officials refused to allow him to see the artifacts, what to speak of film them. Now, we were able to find some photographs of the artifacts that Dr. Whitney had taken in the 19th century, so we did have some images to show in the documentary. But it was interesting what happened when scientists who support the Darwinian theory of evolution learned that NBC was going to show this documentary. They tried to stop NBC from showing it. They weren't successful. NBC did show it, and it was very popular. And that made these scientists upset. So they went to the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, the agency of the government that regulates the television broadcasting industry. And they tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, to censure NBC, to force NBC to broadcast primetime apologies for having shown the program. And they also wanted the government to fine NBC millions of dollars. Now, I'm happy to say the government didn't do any of these things, but I thought it was interesting these kinds of attempts were made. So a couple of years later, I went back to the museum myself. You know, I am a member of the World Archaeological Congress, which is the world's largest international organization of archaeologists. And I had made a proposal to present a report about these California gold mine discoveries at their next big international conference. And that proposal was accepted by the academic committee of the conference. So with that letter in hand, I was able to go to the museum officials, and they decided they would let me personally see these artifacts. They're not kept in the museum itself. They're kept in a storage building several miles from the museum, but, oops, wrong buttons. But they are still there, and these are some of them. And I also studied Dr. Whitney's original maps and field notes, and then I went into the Sierra Nevada mountains This is Table Mountain as it looks today, and we were able to find some of the old 19th century gold mining tunnels where these objects were originally discovered, and it should be possible to do more research there. So, how far back in time can we go with evidence like this? In the year 1862, a scientific journal called The Geologist published an interesting report. An anatomically modern human skeleton was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois. Above the skeleton was a thick layer of slate rock that extended for hundreds of yards in all directions, and that layer of slate rock was unbroken. According to modern geologists, the layer under the slate rock in which the skeleton was found is about 300 million years old. This interesting report from Scientific American tells of a beautiful metallic vase that was found 15 feet deep in solid rock in Dorchester, which is part of Boston. And according to modern geologists, the age of the layer of rock at that place, at that depth, is about 600 million years. So I could keep you here all night. I could keep you here for many nights from now until Christmas, going through hundreds of these cases, because there are hundreds of these cases in the scientific literature from the time of Darwin up to the present. But, I'm not going to do that because, we want to get on to some other things. But the point is that there is some archaeological evidence that is consistent with what the ancient Sanskrit writings tell us about the history of the human species on this planet. So I'm going to end this talk by telling you about some of my experiences in presenting this kind of thing to university audiences in different parts of the world. My books are now published in about 20 different languages. One of the languages is Russian. So I've been invited to Russia many times. I've spoken at the Russian Academy of Sciences. I've spoken at universities all over Russia, from one end of the country to the other, from Vladivostok to Moscow to St. Petersburg. I've spoken at dozens of universities there, and usually the lectures go fine, without any problem, but in one or two cases there were some problems. For example, this is the Tyumen State University in Russia, and some professors there wanted to hear me speak, so they invited me to give a lecture at the university. But the day before the lecture, the president of the university canceled the lecture because some other professors in the university did not want me to speak there. They didn't want me to speak for two reasons. First of all, I was contradicting the Darwinian theory of human evolution, and second, I was doing it from a Vedic perspective. So the professors who invited me tried to get the president of the university to change his mind, but he wouldn't. So the professors who invited me went to the local branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and they spoke to the director there. And he said, okay, if they won't let him speak at the university, he can speak here, and nobody will put any pressure on me to cancel his lecture. So they had buses bring students and professors from the university to the Russian Academy of Science building. And the professors who invited me said more people came than would have come if the lecture had been held at the university. So afterwards, I had a nice private meeting with the local director of the Russian Academy of Sciences and some other scientists. And the next year, something interesting happened. I went back to the same university and I spoke in the biology department there, no problem. So I guess they learned their lesson. Better just let me talk. And let students make up their own minds what they want to think about it. So I also make presentations at major international scientific conferences. I've presented over 30 papers on this topic at major international scientific conferences. The first time I did this was in New Delhi in 1994 at a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress. So, as I mentioned previously, the World Archaeological Congress is the world's largest international organization of archaeologists. They meet every 4 years in a different country. So in that year, they were meeting in India. And I thought this would be the perfect place to bring up this kind of topic. So I presented there a paper called Puranic Time and the Archaeological Record, in which I made many of the same points that I've made here tonight. You know, I spoke about the Vedic concept of time and the archaeological evidence that supports it. So that paper was later published in the peer-reviewed conference proceedings volume, Time and Archaeology, which came out from Routledge, a major scientific publisher. So sometimes people ask me, do you have peer-reviewed scientific publications? And the answer is yes. So again, my final point is that the Vedic historical writings, the Puranas, present a very different picture of the history of the human species on this planet than we find in being taught by many modern scientists today. And some people may think it's all just mythology, but there's scientific evidence also that's consistent with what these ancient Sanskrit writings tell us. So, thank you for listening to this presentation this evening. If you're interested in learning more about these things, this book will be available on a table outside after this talk, and you can have a look at it. There are other books that I've the author of that we don't have here tonight, which you might also find of interest. My most recent book is called My Science, My Religion. It's a collection of 24 papers on these topics that I've presented at major international scientific conferences. And then there are other books that I've written: Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory, the original classic book, Forbidden Archaeology, and the abridged version of Forbidden Archaeology, The Hidden History of the Human Race. So, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So I think do we have some time for comments and questions? 15 minutes. Okay, yes. Okay, let me try to answer your question. The question is, when did Darwin publish his theory in relationship to some of these discoveries that I mentioned tonight? Darwin published his book, The Origin of Species, in 1859, and pretty soon after that, many scientists started speculating about the recent origin of the human species from more primitive ape-like human ancestors. Dr. Whitney's report was published by Harvard University in 1880. So it was a little bit after Darwin published The Origin of Species, and his ideas about human origins had started to spread throughout the scientific world. Discoveries like this have continued up to the present day. The difference is that in Whitney's time, the Darwinian timeline was not very well established, so prominent scientists would be publishing things like he did, that contradict the Darwinian theory of human evolution. But after Darwin's theory became better, more strongly established within the scientific circles, scientists they continued to report evidence like this, but they wouldn't really understand what it meant. I'll give an example of that. In 1979, Mary Leakey found footprints in the country of Tanzania in East Africa at a place called Laetoli. The footprints were in layers of solidified volcanic ash, about 3,700,000 years old. In her original report published in National Geographic magazine, she said the footprints are exactly like modern human footprints. But she didn't present the idea that the footprints were made by human beings like us, because according to her ideas, humans like us did not exist 3,700,000 years ago. So how did she explain the footprints? Well, she said they were probably made by some type of ape man who had feet exactly like modern human feet. So discoveries, actually nobody has ever found the skeleton of any ape man that has feet exactly like modern human feet. The ape men that existed at that time are mostly of the type known as Australopithecus. And foot bones of Australopithecus have been found at a place called Sterkfontein in South Africa. And the foot is not like that of a modern human being. It's like that of a chimpanzee with long toes, sort of like short human fingers a few years ago. But because of the knowledge filtering process, scientists just interpret them in a way that doesn't contradict their theory, even though there's no evidence that would justify them doing that. Well, I would say in the decades immediately after Darwin's theory, scientists were, like Dr. Whitney, were reporting evidence for extreme human antiquity in the scientific literature. And then they were just reporting what they found. Dr. Whitney was just reporting what he found: human bones and human artifacts and layers of rock millions of years old. But he was being more or less an objective scientist. But then, as I pointed out, other scientists who were more strongly influenced by Darwin's ideas, like Dr. Holmes from the Smithsonian Institution, were writing, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of evolution, he wouldn't have written those reports. So it was the scientists like Holmes that won out, and the scientists like Whitney who kind of lost in that kind of climate. So later, scientists stopped reporting directly archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity. If they did report it, they would kind of twist it in such a way that didn't contradict the theories. So, okay, we'll come up to the front this time. Yes?
Have human fossil artifacts ever been discovered alongside dinosaurs, and are dinosaurs evident in the literature?
So, yes, Okay, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, have there been discoveries showing that humans existed at the same time as the dinosaurs? And yes, if you look at the discoveries, I mean, I just mentioned a couple of them that go back from even before the time of the dinosaurs. The discovery of the human skeleton and layers of rock 300 million years old, that's from before the time of the dinosaurs. So there have been discoveries, showing humans existed before the time of the dinosaurs, during the time of the dinosaurs, after the time of the dinosaurs. So what are dinosaurs? I mean, dinosaurs are big, dangerous reptiles. Even today, we share the earth with big, dangerous reptiles. Alligators, for example, are big, dangerous reptiles. And crocodiles are big, dangerous reptiles. Komodo dragons, which live on islands in Indonesia, will attack human beings and kill them. They're huge, monstrous lizards. And there are some descriptions in the Srimad Bhagavatam. There's one description of a lizard as big as a mountain. So Vedic literatures do mention these things, not as extensively as the modern scientific literature does, but there are hints of such things. So something else. Okay, somebody over here. So she's saying she's heard that the Darwinian theory of evolution is considered no longer valid and it's being removed from the textbooks in the schools. I don't think that's quite true yet, that it's being removed from textbooks in the schools. There are many people who would like to see that. I'm personally, what I think should happen is, I don't object if somebody's a Darwinist, if they honestly think that that's the best way to explain things. I think we have to respect the right of people to make up their own minds about these questions. But what I don't think they have a right to do is force their ideas on everyone in the education system. And this is the unfortunate situation today. It's true that the vast majority of biologists today support, the Darwinian theory of evolution, but there are some scientists who don't accept it, and therefore there's some public controversy about intelligent design and creation science and things like that. But so the majority of scientists are promoting the Darwinian theory of evolution, and there are a minority of scientists who are opposing it and who are offering alternatives. But the government has taken the policy decision of giving a monopoly in the education system to the Darwinist, which I think is really not fair in a country that considers itself, democratic and free and all of that. It's as if the government would decide to back one religion, just see what the majority religion is in the country and just say only this religion can be taught in this country, or decide what's the majority political party and just decide, okay, only that political party is going to be able to field candidates. So they've done something similar to that in the education system. Okay, there's a majority of scientists who support the Darwinian theory of evolution, so they've given them a monopoly so that only their ideas can be taught in the public tax-supported schools, even though they're taking tax money from all the people who have a variety of opinions about these things. And scientists even have a variety of opinions about these things, but they're taking tax money from all the people, giving it to one group, and allowing them to force their ideas on everyone. So I think the the best thing to do would be to have some diversity. Okay, if the supporters of the Darwinian theory of evolution are in the majority in the world of science, give them the majority of the textbook pages. But in some part of the textbook pages, it should be acknowledged. And there are some scientists and researchers who do not support the Darwinian theory of evolution and are proposing alternatives like intelligent design and different types of creationism. And then just let students make up their own minds about these things.
So isn't it true that it's very difficult for modern science to accept what they're before right now, except from what we discussed?
So the question is it's very difficult for scientists to accept, some of these things. I mean, there are always differences of opinion in the scientific world about topics. So that's natural. And it's also kind of human nature. For example, say if I love somebody and somebody tells me something bad about the person I love, I don't want to believe it. So many scientists today are very much in love with their theories that they've developed. And if they hear something that goes against it, particularly from people who are in a minority, then they don't like it very much and they resist it. So that's a fact. And then there's also the problem is that the supporters of the current Darwinian theory of evolution have managed to get a government-enforced monopoly in the education system, which has the effect of delegitimizing alternatives. Say, in a country, you have a small political party that's not in the majority, that's not going to control the government, but you like their ideas, and you vote for them. And maybe someday they'll be in the majority. You can do that. But if you outlaw the party, that little party, then nobody's going to want to identify with it. So the current generation of scientists that's being trained in the schools and universities today, they're kind of taught to stay away from alternative ideas if they want to get their degree, if they want to get their post, if they want to get their grant. Because that's the effect of excluding alternative ideas from the curriculum. It has the effect of delegitimizing them in the minds of people who are preparing for scientific careers. And therefore, they'll just want to stay away from that. They won't want to identify with it because it'll mean, they won't get their degree, they won't get their post, they won't get their grant. So I think things should open up a little bit. And then I think they wouldn't, if these things were made part of the curriculum, then I think that delegitimization tactic wouldn't work anymore. Yes, in the back. Is there any Vedic reference about why we were created? Yes. After people read my book, Forbidden Archaeology, which contained evidence contradicting the Darwinian theory of evolution, they said, okay, well, what are you proposing as an alternative? If you don't accept the Darwinian theory of evolution, then where did we come from? So, to answer that question, I wrote a book called Human Devolution, a Vedic Alternative to Darwin's Theory, which is based on the Vedic teachings. And before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from, we should first ask the question, what is a human being? Now today, many scientists will say we're just machines made of molecules. And as far as our consciousness is concerned, well, if you organize the molecules in the brain in a sufficiently complex way, they'll generate consciousness. but only in connection with the brain. When you disorganize the chemicals at the time of death, there's no more consciousness. So it's a very matter-based picture of reality. But the Vedic teaching is the opposite. It's a consciousness-based picture of reality. Matter does not produce consciousness. Consciousness can exist independently from matter. And if we observe consciousness very closely, we see it's individual and it's personal. I have my consciousness, you have yours. And that suggests there's a source of all conscious beings that is also individual, personal, and conscious. And according to the Vedic teachings, we are originally beings of pure consciousness. Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. And we have an eternal relationship with the source of all conscious beings, who is also individual and personal. And our purpose is to understand what that relationship is, to purify consciousness, restore it to its original state. So we're originally meant, we've never been created. According to the Vedic teachings, consciousness or spirit is never created, it's never destroyed. There's no birth and death for consciousness, for spirit, for the soul, if you want to use the theological term. So the purpose for which we exist is to exist in a harmonious, loving relationship with the source of all conscious beings and with all other conscious beings. So that is our purpose. And the Vedic teachings give methodologies for realizing that. Different systems of yoga, meditation, especially in this age, the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, which will be going on now. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, everyone. So we'll quickly get organized. The next part of the program is Kirtan, and this is the auspicious month of Kartik. So everybody here at the temple gets an opportunity to offer candles to the deities. So what we're going to try to do is, we're going to try to make a line on the right-hand side. We're going to bring those banisters on the other side and form a line. All the devotees near the wall can, on the left-hand side, towards the wall. Well, stage, left, right. And please, Mataji, there will be washing your hands, and then she'll light you a candle and give it to you for offering. Please be mindful to give preference to ladies and ladies with children first, and gents can follow after that. Sureshwar.
Check. Whichever one you don't play.
Bye.